Welcome back to New Millennium Art. This is the introduction to Module 4, Institutional Critique Outside the Museum. Rather than looking at works that critique the institution of the museum or the gallery setting, works that critique art as an institution, we're going to look at works of art that critique other institutions that are outside the museum. Behind me is a work by Liz Magic Laser. It's a production still from the work Chase. We see a performer within an ATM vestibule by the name of Michael Weiner as Jeremiah Jip, a character within Bertolt Brecht's Man Equals Man. Liz Magic Laser took this as basically a starting point, this play, 1926 play by Bertolt Brecht, as a starting point to talk about economics and criticize economic theory as well as the docile body and something we'll be talking about known as the individual. In doing so, she had a troupe of actors go largely to chase Manhattan banks, but to other banks like here. This character is shown within the I don't know quite how to say this bank. Amalgamate Bank branch on 52 Broadway in New York City. But they went from ATM vestibule to ATM vestibule acting out this play. And we have the video within the module, so you can click on it and watch the video. Here we're looking at a photograph that is a production still that then would be sold as part of the work. It's 20 by 30 inches. And so I left that in as part of the description of the work so you could see that it's made into an object for commodification and to be sold as a production still, as a photograph. So throughout this work, members of her troupe, if you will, these actors, under her direction, she doesn't actually perform, she's more of an artistic director, go from ATM vestibule to ATM vestibule, and they act out the play, oftentimes with bystanders just going about their business. What's interesting about it is that we see this shift starting to occur. And we also see an affirmation of the idea of the docile body. Foucault's disciplinary societies is where it's contained. Foucault talks about this as disciplinary societies, and within disciplinary societies you have the docile body. We've talked about this before, and you really do see that within these ATM vestibules. People have very strict behaviors that they adhere to. Pretty much they're a little bit apprehensive. Someone's going to see their pen, someone's going to steal from them, someone's going to rip them off, right? Particularly in New York City. There's a little bit of, I'm doing my business, I'm here, I'm commuting with the machine, don't talk to me. And so these disruptions become mixed in terms of the reviews. Some people get it, and within the video you'll see some people applauding because they catch the allusion to Bertolt Brecht's original play. Other people are very alarmed by it. But what also it does is it starts to move us towards an idea by Gilles Deleuze that he talks about in his Societies of Control and the Individual. This idea is that we have moved from being a docile body to becoming an individual. We've moved from becoming an individual, a unique person, to becoming an individual. And in being an individual, we are essentially a code. We're essentially data. We're no longer a number or a signature like one would have within a disciplinary society that Foucault talks about, but now we're more of a code. Right? And what changes, and I was thinking about this earlier, what changes between the idea of a code and a number? Well, codes are changeable, right? When you have a strict number, like your Social Security number or any sort of federal number, it doesn't change, right? But your ATM number will change. It's a code. It's a code in flux in a sense, and we respond to that code. The other day, I went to get coffee in the morning, and I had this moment of existential crisis. I'm at Starbucks, I'm getting my coffee, I go to pay, and my card was declined. I've never had this happen before, and I didn't know quite what to do. I really didn't know what to do. And so I tried it again. And then I did it 3 times until I said, okay, the card's not going to work. But in this, I started getting kind of panicked. Not so much because I couldn't have my coffee, which was an important feature, but more so because my identity was kind of shifted. Did somebody steal my number? Did my card get shut down? What happened? In the end, it was a bank error. It wasn't one of my errors. But it put me in this position of kind of being uncertain. And I started thinking about this on the way to my class where, this is the idea of the individual. I am that card. I am to some degree that code. And so if that's taken from me, I have this existential moment. And this is what really happens as a threat within these works by Liz Magic Laser. And yes, that is actually her name. It's not a made-up name. It's not a stage name. She was born Liz Magic Laser, which she likes to point out quite a lot. The other thing that happens is we get this territories of spaces of control, this questioning of territories as spaces of control. Where have the public spaces gone? So you go into a space like your ATM vestibule, right? We don't have very many of those in West Virginia, but in large cities you have basically banks that are just ATMs. There's no person to engage. It's almost this automated response in terms of getting your money or making a deposit. And we kind of think of them as being public spaces. And one thing that Liz Magic Laser's Chase shows is that they're really not. They seem as if you're not being watched, right? It seems as if it's completely anonymous, but then someone comes in and they start performing a play, the play by Bertolt Brecht, and they start kind of reciting something. Next thing you know, men come out, typically, wearing suits, not security, guard uniforms, but suits, but they are security, and they say, you need to leave. And they're a little aggressive when they do this. Very much you know that the space is not a public space, it's a private space. The same thing's true if you think in terms of a mall. The mall we think of as being this kind of public space. It's a social space, right? You've got the food court, you've got places that you can sit and lounge throughout, but at the same time, you can't film or photograph within the mall space because it's an owned space. It isn't a public space. So we get these places that are kind of between territories of public and private. And this is something that seems to be part of orienting the docile body to perform within the space, to be a trained body within the space. And with the ATM vestibules, we see this collusion, if you will, to this idea of the individual, where the individual is replaced by a set of codes and data or demographic information that kind of says who we are. Liz Magic Laser kind of starts off with this idea of technology as an institution and a critique of this institution. She's critiquing economics and she's critiquing banking practices with Chase, but she's also critiquing technology as an institution at large. In a more recent piece, known as The Thought Leader of 2015, she has a mock TED Talk. She has an actor play a speaker. The actor is Alex Ammerman. So again, she's moving through that whole idea of having actors as her surrogates. So she's not directly performing, but she's directing the performance and being the artistic director of the performance. And again, like with Chase, she looks to literature. This time she looks to Fyodor Dostoevsky and his Notes from the Underground, which was written in the late 19th century. It produces a dialectic. Because when we think of a TED Talk, they're short, they're typically upbeat, they're typically positive, they're about how you can improve yourself, about how you can improve society. And here comes this 10-year-old actor, and he says that he is content to do nothing. That he expects to do nothing. And that anything we can do is just futile. If you think in terms of the idea of the TED Talk, this is in contradiction to it. This is really in contradiction to notions of liberalism and modernity from the Renaissance. This idea of progress is really placed into question here. And we have to realize that TED Talks aren't just simply, inspirational talks. They're a forum for technology, entertainment, and design. And so it has this kind of quality to it that could be considered to be an institution, that it becomes the face of the institution of technology, so to speak. And so to have this young speaker say, I plan to do nothing, and we can't become what we want to be, the crowd seems to kind of laugh and kind of play it off and think, who's this kid? And then as you move through it, the idea is very complex. He starts to move through the idea, and the idea, of course, is derived from Dostoevsky, this famous nihilistic book. Nihilism is a philosophical branch which is in opposition to this idea of progress. Nihilism is this idea that we can't really affect change. Sounds really dark, but at the same time, it takes the pressure off. And so it's kind of a positive. If you can't affect change, well, You don't have to worry about affecting change. You don't have to worry about progress. You can just simply live. And this is something that's critiqued here by Liz Magic Laser. And in a sense, she's critiquing TED as an entity in and of itself. What's interesting is, as I was doing the research for this course, TED used to stand for Technology, Education, and Design. Now TED, if you go to the original site, it stands for Technology, Entertainment, and Design. Very different. And it might take us back to Module 3 where we were talking about edutainment. Is TED edutainment? It's very short talks, no more than 18 minutes in length. So it's kind of this idea of, she questions it. Is this young boy a guru? And it's entertaining and humorous, as most of her work is. And so she really engages this sublime to get us to think about progress and really what the goals of progress are economically, but also what that means for us as a society. Dissent and culture jamming. Many institutional critiques take this point of view. It's dissent. So, but mostly I want to talk about culture jamming, what culture jamming is. Culture jamming isn't necessarily an artistic practice, it's a social practice in terms of social protest. And so what some people will do is and you'll see videos of this if you go to YouTube, where they'll go in and say, there's a product that they find to be really horrendous. I was talking about makeup in terms of animal testing. Well, they will then make a fake label that looks just like it aesthetically, and they'll sneak into places and they'll put that label onto the product that talks about animal rights and things. So you purchase the product and then you flip it over, you're reading the instructions, and it has all the things that are wrong with it or are problematic with the product. The Yes Men are an artistic collective that does this a great deal. They're best known for this work. Well, one of the works that they're best known for is the New York Times special edition that is in November 12th, 2008. They produced an actual physical newspaper that was distributed throughout New York City, and it was this kind of utopian vision. It's a good example of culture jamming because it takes on the aesthetic of the New York Times, but then it puts in stories that people want to read. You know, at that time, the Iraq War was very contentious, and so the image that you see behind me is the Iraq War ends. But there are other ideas that are these kind of utopian ideas of how one would want the world to be that are presented within this. And it's important to make note that the Yes Men are not just two people who are oftentimes associated with it, Andy Bickelman and Mike Bonanno, but this was a product of hundreds of people coming together in order to put forth this mock newspaper. It was something what Irving Goffman calls a corrective hoax. It's something that is kind of forgiven. It could be considered illegal to some degree, and some of their activities could be considered illegal. But because it's a corrective hoax, it's meant to kind of put light on how things should be or how things ought to be. The Yes Men are best known for the Beaupas apology. This is Andy Bickelbaum posing as Jude Finisterra, a representative of Dow Chemical. Dow Chemical bought Union Carbide International and Union Carbide in 2000, and they had claimed that they would make restitution to all the damages that Union Carbide had done in terms of physical illness as well as catastrophes. The best known catastrophe associated with Union Carbide, and sadly, is the 1984 Bhopal disaster, in which thousands of people died as a result of a chemical leak in India. Compensation has always been questionable, as well as what was really released. Jude Finisterra goes on BBC Live. He actually pulls this off. He's in Paris. We can see the Eiffel Tower behind him. He gives a live feed to BBC, and he claims to be a representative of Dow Chemical, which he is not. And he says that Dow Chemical takes full responsibility and basically is going to liquidate the assets of Union Carbide in order to make compensation to these thousands of people in India who were affected by this chemical disaster. Later he was found out, but he was miraculously able to go through the entire interview as Jude Finisterra, this representative of Bhopal, or rather this representative of, this representative of Dow Chemical talking about Bhopal. And part of this was because in 2003 it was the 20th anniversary of the disaster, and so the news was kind of eager to see what Dow thought of Union Carbide's mishap, if you will. This kind of publicity gives the yes men a great deal of attention, and then they were asked to come back and talk to BBC. So BBC tried to rectify it by saying, well, we'll have these activists come back. This kind of corrective hoaxing is an important aspect of institutional critique outside the museum. I wanted to also talk about the power of language as institutional critique. In particular, I want to talk about German, and we'll talk into something very quickly. But Volke, which means the people, versus der Bevölkerung, to the population. Very similar terms, but with very different meaning. Volke in German oftentimes refers to the German people, right? Which people? The German people. Der Bevölkerung means to the population, so it means the people in general. Hans Haack was asked to make an installation within the courtyard at the Reichstag in Berlin. Within this courtyard, legislators can look down and see these words, to the population, or der Bevölkerung, to be reminded that they are not there to represent the people, but to represent the population. This is very contentious because of the Nazi Germany past. In 2000, the Reichstag was reopened after being burned in the 1930s. When the Reichstag caught fire, the Nazis, and in particular Adolf Hitler, used this as an excuse to create repressive laws to expunge enemies of the Nazi Party. It remained empty until 2000, when a unified Germany, East and West, came back into the Reichstag to be legislators again. And Haake's work reminds, through text and through language, the importance of the population. Not just simply an ethnic group, not simply a portion of the population, the people, but all of the people. And it reminds us that Germany is an international nation state. It is not a place of one ethnicity, but a place of multiple ethnicities, multiple nationalities, and that the representatives within those chambers at the Reichstag are there to represent not just simply one group, but the group, the population within. Utopian promises, dark realities, social realities of institutional policy. I'd like to end by looking at this work by Cao Fei, Whose Utopia? It's a 20-minute film. It was filmed on location at a lighting plant. So this is a light bulb factory in China. The light bulb factory is an acronym, OSRAM, China Lighting Limited. It's in a very prosperous industrial region of China right now, known as the Pearl River Delta. It was made in 2000. And behind me you see two clips. So these are two photographs from the film. One's in black and white, the other one's in color. And it's this grim reality of industrialization and manufacturing. In America, we oftentimes have this sense of loss, a loss of industrial jobs, a loss of manufacturing jobs. But manufacturing jobs were not easy jobs, certainly. They were in some ways very mind-numbing, doing the same task again and again and again. And we get this kind of monotony expressed, and this kind of melancholy that's expressed in the black and white film sections where we see reality. But then we have this fantasy that's then put forth in the color, where we have these surreal fantasy elements where we're almost in the thoughts of the workers as they're dancing through the aisles of the factory or performing Tai Chi. And so we get this kind of merging of fiction and reality with Cao Fei and her Whose Utopia, which really questions institutional policies of the government again. Because we have to realize that in China, the opening up of factories and commerce with the West has in part been largely one of the government's doing. But it's also been one, and this is where you get institutional critique and social critique to merge, it's also been one that was supported by the people of China in terms of this idea of having good work, having modern industrialized work rather than agricultural work, and expanding one's possibilities and potential for economic well-being. And so we get these two realities kind of merging together in Cao Fei's Whose Utopia, which is really quite a beautiful piece. And this is where I'd like to end Module 4. And if you have any questions, again, be sure to email me or blog me. And also be sure to read your module, because there are other works that were not discussed, and the works that were discussed were also discussed in greater detail than here. So, thank you.